wanted to talk about the Martin Vespuli and Sergey Kuzmin fight. What a weird situation. But first, if you're listening on archive, and it does, because YouTube sometimes puts in like a zillion ads. So if they have done that, leave a comment and I'll go in and delete them, because I like to have something every either 15 or 20 minutes, so it's, not too intrusive. But I went to listen back the other day and there was like 20 or so in the first hour, which is ridiculous. And I don't like listening or watching to streams that have that many amount of ads. So if you can, leave that comment if it does sort of spam it with ads. But we've got Adam Fahey in the chat here. So a number of things that I've got on my list. We've got IMPK 13. So I wanted to talk about Vespuli Kuzmin not happening. What a weird situation. Vespuli has also been sparring Daniel Dubois. Dave Allen potentially added to that card, but in what fashion, unclear. Who is Alan Babbage fighting? Because he was confirmed a couple of weeks ago as being on the card. Also, we have a fight coming up in less than a day's time from when this live stream goes up. Zan Kosobutsky is going to be facing Kamil Sokolowski, so they've weighed in. We'll get to that. Vlad Sirenko reflecting on his performance against Pavel Krylenko, got rocked in that fight, but ultimately went on to win it. We'll talk a little bit about Otto Wallin and Travis Kaufman. That's coming up August 15th. There's actually not a lot on the schedule for the next week or so. After the Kosobutsky and Sokolowski fight, there really is nothing of note on this weekend, and it is the sort of Wallin and Kaufman fight in a sort of 10 days time that is going to be the main action. Dillian White, that's also coming up, that pay-per-view event with Alexander Povetkin at the end. Also, to say it's the fourth Matchroom Fight Camp card, August the 22nd, so later this month, 2.5 weeks-ish. So just getting back to the chat here, is just in my notes. Can you see on screen, is the chat showing? I spent about 10 minutes this morning trying to work it out again, but whoever is so if someone can let me know if it's actually coming up. Welcome to one and all in the chat there. So we've got Project 9, Declan McCarthy, Unrivaled Boxing Talk and News, Will Stokes, the Flying Pan Man. Welcome one and all, wherever you are, morning, noon or night. And it was actually Unrivaled Boxing Talk and News who'd posted that clip of Eddie Hearn talking about Vespuli, still looking for a fight, and then in the next breath mentioning Dave Allen potentially being on that card. So that's what put me onto it. But after that, when I'd seen that, because that sort of came up during the fights, I think I'd seen it during the cards, the Ukraine card or the Wardley and Vespuli card, and I thought, well, I'll just wait, a little bit to see what sort of information comes up. And nothing really has happened since, and it's all been sort of quiet on the Western Front for what's happening there. And as in that video that I did just last night, my time, Vespuli was travelling with Billy Nelson down to London, and we know now why. He was actually sparring with Daniel Dubois, so good preparation for Vespuli, but also for Dubois, who's facing Eric Pfeiffer on the 29th of August, so they both get the benefit of that. But a strange situation, not a lot of information that's come out about this Kuzmin not fighting Vespuli. It's really hard to know what's gone on here, and that sort of post from Sergey Kuzmin, which, is it related to, not fighting Vespuli, or it's hard to say. It was a bit of a weird sort of post, trying to be a bit deep and meaningful. So if you haven't caught that, go to his Instagram and you'll see what I mean. It would have been about the time that if the fight was sort of, the pin was pulled, it would have been about that time that he posted it. Getting back to the chat here, it's hard now because I can see it on screen on my side on two different places going at the same time, so I've got to get used to that. But fortunately, I've got the chat working, I think. So the Flying Pan Man says, kia ora. Will says, hello. Declan says, better yet, a Povetkin versus Ortiz matchup. The possibility of that fight, that would have been great a few years ago. But I just kind of think with the where their careers have headed, who they're sort of working with at the moment, I can't sort of see it coming off. In terms of, I see Unrivaled Boxing Talk and News asking about the Zan Kossobutski and Kamil Sokolowski fight. I'll be getting that to that in a moment. I just posted some of the weigh-in, so I went to the Siesta Boxing YouTube, put a little clip, sort of montage together of the weigh-in up on Twitter. So actually, we might as well talk about that now. So Zan Kossobutski is facing Kamil Sokolowski. It's on the Cold Wars Battle 4 card that El Siesta with Siesta Boxing is doing out in Minsk. So this is like the 4th card or whatever it is. Originally it was meant to be, I believe, Jay McFarland, and he'd even sort of done a few posts in a fake sort of, promo poster about facing Zan Kossobutski, who's a rising prospect out of Kazakhstan, 13-0. I think the Sokolowski fight maybe actually a little better. Maybe that's a slightly better test. I don't know. Sokolowski and McFarlane probably somewhere around the same level. But it's going to be a good sort of, I don't want to say test, but we'll see where he's sort of at in his pro career in terms of the development. Because for, most boxing fans, even heavyweight fans who follow the division quite closely, Kossobutski has been largely out of sight, out of mind until more recently. He got a good upset win over Argon Smakichi last year. He's sort of fought a couple of times since in really nothing sort of fights. But Kamil Sokolowski is the prospect killer. He's had a few different names on his record in recent years. So overall, it's something like 9-17 and a couple of draws, something like that. It's not over sort of flattering. If you looked at the record, you never seen Sokolowski fight, you'd think it was just a guy who's coming to fall down. But progressively, he's been getting better and better. He's got wins over like Alice Machin, Alex Dickinson, Naylor Ball, Sean Turner, all took their O's. He is sort of that gatekeeper journeyman. If you're not good enough, he's going to actually beat you. And he beat Nick Webb too. So he's not a guy that's just going to lay down. So this could go some rounds. Sokolowski's got a decent chin, he's got decent ability, but Zan Kossobutski should be a couple of pegs above in terms of his ability and level. So I'm interested to see this fight. So I've already booked it on Fight TV. So I think it's like $7.99 US. So wherever you are, and if you're going to watch that one, do your conversion. But so that's out in Minsk. It's one of the sort of feature fights on the 4th card, the Battle 4 on El Siesta's Cold War. So I'm looking forward to that fight. It's one of these things. I haven't really seen Kossobutski fight a lot live. Generally you have to sort of go hunting for a bit of footage, so it's going to be sort of a little bit of a novelty to sort of be able to watch a better test that he's in. Okay, just getting down to the chat here. Oh yeah, so the chat is showing. Good, it only took me about 10 different times to get that working. AZ says, hey there, Boxing Squared. James Baker says, greetings to one and all, wherever you are, morning, noon, and night. Hello to Scars, the Troll Network, and anyone else who's just joined. I'm just sort of slowly just going down the chat now. So if I do miss greeting or a question, so apologies in advance. The chat can start to move quite quickly. So we're at 25 in the building at this point. It's 10:38 here New Zealand time, Tuesday morning. We've got Blue Collar Sports TV in the building. He's got a great channel, Unrivaled Boxing Talk and News as well. He's got a great channel. Do subscribe to them, check them out if you haven't already done so. So Organic Fitness says, caught it. Good to see another live stream, mate. It was another sort of impromptu one, just with the sort of Bacoli stuff as well. I sort of thought this is just a really weird situation. Because it's almost like it sort of came out accidentally from Eddie Hearn, and there was no real follow-up from the interviewer. It was sort of like the interviewer already knew what was happening. He sort of threw it out there. Hearn gave him what he wanted to, as opposed to maybe being pushed about what he could really sort of expand on in some detail. But I guess the sort of question is, with the whole sort of Dave Allen angle, does that mean he's going to be facing Bacoli, or he's going to be Bacoli comes off the card and Dave Allen comes on and faces someone else? Or the other option is Alan Babbage was confirmed on the card a couple of weeks ago. Is it going to be Dave Allen versus Alan Babbage? So there's a number of questions with this, and it's just been so bizarre how quiet it's gone. It's just so weird. So that sort of came out. There's been a bit on social media. People were talking about it. And then sort of 36 hours later, at the time that I did my video last night, there really hadn't been, nothing, anywhere. I did a Google search and really came up with nothing. And then you had the likes of Billy Nelson and Martin Bacoli still active on social media, getting questions from people. People were, obviously sort of saying, hey, what's happening here? And it's just sort of, obviously everyone involved's been told to be quiet and to, as things are being worked out and, sort of shaking down. It's hard to, get a real read on what's happened here. I mean, is Sergei Kuzmin injury, or has he pulled out for other reasons, corona, or maybe something's happened in training camp? Maybe the preparations at the final end haven't been, as good as they could have been, and he's decided to pull. I mean, it's just so many things to, what it could be. And everyone's just sort of staying stum at the moment and not saying anything. So the super chat there from Organic Fitness, boxing news and views. Thank you for that. Appreciate that, Organic Fitness. And Unrivaled Boxing Talk and News with the super chat too. Thank you very much for that. He says, thank you, sir. Appreciated. What are your thoughts on people tweeting at Michael Hunter to fight Wardley? I feel that's too much. What say you? At this point, I mean, that's jumping way ahead of the sort of level that he needs to be fighting at. I mean, I'm sort of thinking Fabio Wardley still is fighting some guys around that sort of Simon Villili or a slight step up type level. It'd be a good opportunity to get a few defenses and then get that belt outright. I think, he needs more seasoning. What is he now, 9-0? I mean, if they have plans to really build him, they'll build him the right way. They're not just going to throw him to the wolves, a la sort of, Dave Allen a few years ago when he was sort of unbeaten, but then ended up getting tossed in with Ortiz and White, etc. I think Wardley wouldn't be facing the likes of Michael Hunter for a couple of years yet. That would just be my thinking on it. I'm sure Michael Hunter would be looking at this guy, and this guy's pretty green, limited amateur background, hasn't really been tested, no one's taken him to deep waters, and with Hunter's style, he'd probably think that for a guy as green as Wardley so far, that's easy money. I'm sure it wouldn't be a completely easy fight, but I'd certainly pick Michael Hunter all day at this point. I mean, we haven't seen enough of Wardley to really know where his ceiling is. Obviously, he's a natural athlete, and he's a guy who's sort of picked up the sport pretty late, got into it, and he looks pretty good, technically, and, the movement and the reflexes was pretty impressive the other night, but, far too early for me. So David says, rumblings about Allen and Gashi, who you got? Actually, I think that's a pretty entertaining fight. I think that's about the level where Dave Allen probably needs to fight. Gashi will trade and engage if he believes he's got a shot in a fight, a la against Tom Schwartz, who put on the acting job of the century to try get Gashi disqualified. But you saw Gashi against Takam and Chisora. He didn't want to know. And so he can really sort of get his skates on when he feels like there's a bit of danger. I think a guy like Dave Allen, who's probably after a few rounds because I think Allen will try to come out and, box and move a little bit, show people that he's got some head movement, and then he'll revert to type once he sort of tires a little bit. And Gashi can, if you've seen a little bit of Senad Gashi's early career, I mean, at one point he was undefeated and it was like all knockouts, early on too, so he can bang a bit, but I guess against a guy like Dave Allen, probably even if he does catch him a few times, Allen's got a chin. But I think that's an interesting fight. But there's the question, should that fight be on this card? And there is with Bacoli and Kuzmin, it's a quality fight, and if that comes off, what are you putting on in place of it? And the other thing is, if Bacoli stays on the card, who are they tossing him in with? That's a question too, because, do we need to see Bacoli versus... I mean, he fought a who's who of sort of the tough, durable journeyman in 2019. You had your Kevin Johnsons, your Talo Pereira, also Rodney Hernandez, Marius Vuk as well. I mean, you don't need any more of that. You need him in a meaningful fight. And if he is not facing Kuzmin and it ends up being just some sort of tick over, it's massively disappointing for fans who wanted to see him in that next sort of step type fight, and disappointing for Bacoli himself, because they will know it's a missed opportunity. So Right Hook Boxing in the chat, he's got a great channel too. Do check it out. Nathan says Wardley should fight someone like Nick Webb next. In my opinion, it makes sense coming off that Ultimate Boxer win. Yeah, I think so too. I mean, Webb is on the comeback trail, and there must have been, I think, about half a dozen comments or so in the comments section of the video that I did last night suggesting, well, Webb might make, or the other day I should say, Webb might make sense for Fabio Wardley. And I think that's kind of about the level that, he should be fighting at the moment. I mean, you could even say Fabio Wardley versus Dave Allen. I mean, I guess at an outside stretch, could they put Wardley and Allen on that card on the 22nd? Wardley being a Dillian Whyte sort of managed fighter. Potentially it could happen. Remember, Alan Babbage, another Dillian Whyte managed fighter, was confirmed on the card. But his opponent's still TBA or TBC. I mean, it's sort of hard to know what's going to happen now if this whole Kuzman thing doesn't happen, because there could be some dominoes, and does Alan Babbage end up getting squeezed out because Eddie Hearn might look at the quality of the card dropping and go, well, let's hit the Dave Allen button. He's got some, some... And I know a couple of people acted a little angrily to my suggestion. He had that sort of social media sort of star power. But, he's got a lot of fans and followers on social media. Doesn't necessarily mean they're always going to watch him fight, especially paying, pay-per-view prices. But, he brings a bit more name recognition to that card if he comes on. Whether he deserves to be there or not is another question. So Jay Billow says, hey there from the UK, been following the channel for a few years. Big ups. Thank you for the continued support. I do appreciate it. DJN1 says, sup, Boxing Squared, sup, back to you. Father Finton Stack, Wardley versus Allen or Gorman be a good scrap. Yeah, I did see Gorman's name sort of thrown in there a little bit too. I just think with the promotional ties, it probably prohibits that. I think, it'll be interesting to see with what happens with Nathan Gorman, because he kind of has been the black sheep of that Frank Warren stable, tossed in quite late on a number of occasions with, short noticed opponents. And yeah, I mean, if he comes back, and I'm sure he wants his rebuild to, be a bit more planned, and, not to have, new opponents at a week's notice, etc., and sort of be that Sally's, fill the gap type guy. Right Hook Boxing says, gutted about the Bacoli fight. Yeah, if Kuzman doesn't happen, that is very disappointing. The card does sort of suffer as a result. Wardley only 9 fights in, so no need to rush him. Completely agree. Wardley is a decade younger than Joyce. Glad you can do the maths there, Lou. Blue Collar Sports TV says, Wardley looks good when you look at the context of his career. Literally had 0 amateur fights. He needs time to develop. Yeah, completely agree. I think there's, the natural ability and talent will get him so far, but if you sort of rush him, it sort of could all come a cropper. I mean, there's that sort of saying that it takes years to build heavyweights up and just 10 seconds to tear them down. And I think he needs that seasoning now. And let's face it, with the prospects that Matchroom have had more recently, they haven't really put them into any sort of tests that you sort of think are beyond them at the point that they have, the sort of their development fights. I mean, we've been sort of calling for guys like Filip Hrgović to get tougher tests and that sort of thing. I think they will match him, relatively appropriately, and probably look after a couple of defences of the English title. If he can get a shot at the British title, I think they'll probably look to move him that sort of route. Adam says, Wardley could fight the likes of Price, Farr, Gorman, Carman now. Yeah, I mean, a guy like Dylan Carman, it could literally be just about the number. There's a number of sort of guys at that level, which I think Wardley would, go in and look good against. Jay Billow says, Blue Collar Sports TV, you were suggesting Allen versus Wardley. Love that fight. I guess for Dave Allen, knowing that Fabio Wardley is a guy on the rise and likely is going to outbox him, use speed against him, I don't know if Allen would take that unless the money was massive. And the thing is, he said it needs to be the right opponent too, and he needs to do things right. He wants to go all the way to the top, etc. And that was a post on social media. There's going to be a disconnect about, what he wants and what the reality will be, because I don't think Eddie Hearn has any plans of sort of, bringing Dave Allen along in the sort of way that Dave Allen wants to be, sort of have his rebuild play out. I mean, Dave Allen, if he comes on this card, he's plugging a hole. But in terms of Gashi and Allen, that's probably more realistic in terms of a fight. And in terms of action, it could actually end up playing out quite well. It might end up in a sort of Senagashi knockout. I could actually see Dave Allen taking a bit of a pasting for a number of rounds, but as soon as Dave Allen starts to, Senagashi starts to tire, if they'd made that fight, I think Dave Allen would get into it, probably end up stopping him. Father Finton Stack says Nathan Gorman, Sean Turner, Dave Allen, Wardley should aim for them. Yeah, a couple of those guys, around that English level, Dave Allen, Sean Turner, they would sort of be seemingly perfect type of opponents right now. There's a number of guys. Nathan says, Wardley, I like the look of him, but it would be crazy for them to rush him, in my opinion. Well, especially if you think about in the context, he's 24, 25 years old. You've got the guys like Dillian White, Anthony Joshua, at 30, early 30s now. They're going to have to start looking to that next crop to bring them through as the next guys that are going to start waving the banner for their promotional company. And this is one of the things I was talking about recently in a couple of Patreon vids, because I looked at the different promotional stables. And the thing that stables like Frank Warren and Top Rank do well is generally they have succession planning. They're looking for that next sort of crop, and they bring them along and develop them. There's not as much of that at Matchroom. It sort of seems they, buy ready-made fighters to some extent. So Woker Sam says, Valili should retire. Fabio was beating some low-level tier guys. Not like One Punch. Valili has a glass chin and body. Nathan says Wardley versus Nick Webb would be a good next step. I think that fight does make a lot of sense. Good fight for Nick Webb on his comeback too, on his rebuild. Okay, I'll just go down the chat here. So Allen has a chin of granite. Price couldn't do anything with him, and he clearly is a massive puncher. I honestly think Allen can withstand anybody's shots, to be honest. Yeah, but withstanding anybody's shots, but then being stopped on your feet, they're two different things. I mean, Tony Yoka sort of, really liked David Price, just really picked him apart for 9 rounds, and then in the 10th and final round of their fight decided, well, I'll put it on him. And it's not like Allen went down or anything, it's just he wasn't responding. The ref jumps in. But yeah, I don't think we can or want to see Allen in with some of these guys that are just going to beat him up anymore. And because I do think to some extent the whole let's put Dave Allen on the card, it's going to really help the card. I think those days are somewhat gone. I think his brand has taken, especially in terms of not just, hardcore boxing fans, but boxing fans more broadly. They've seen what guys like David Price have done to him. Do we want to keep seeing him get beaten up? I'll just take a sip of coffee, just bear with me. So Lawrence Williams says, what's good? So Lawrence has a great channel too, really detailed and in-depth information on all sorts of boxing topics. Unrivaled Boxing Talk says, I'd like Wardley versus Sokolowski or Cash Ali. That Cash Ali fight, that could be there for him. They've, worked with Matchroom before, so I could sort of see that sort of fight happening, and it's probably, a step up for Ali as well, and he's able to, have a crack at a belt of sorts. Allen is known for his durability, but his boxing skill is lacking. No disagreement from me there. Blue Collar Sports TV says, honestly, I wouldn't be upset if Wardley even fought someone like Josh Sandlin next. Well, there's a number of those guys who were in that Ultimate Boxer tournament, like Sokolowski, like Sandlin, Jay McFarland, Nick Webb. I thought it was a very evenly matched tournament, and there was Mark Bennett and a couple of others as well. I wouldn't mind him against any of those sorts of guys for a fight or two, and then after that start to pick it up, maybe start progressing towards British level. There's no reason to rush him right now. So Jay Billow says, Allen has been talking about slowing his career down. Wardley seems ideal. He won't want Bacoli. Yeah, I don't think the Wardley fight happens, or the Bacoli one for Allen. Be interesting who they do if he is on this card, but ultimately it'll come down to money. Will Dave Allen price himself out again? Just Tyrone Spong versus Bacoli, maybe. I think it's probably too late in the piece. If Spong hasn't been, in a proper training camp. I mean, It'll be interesting to see what some of the promoters with the upcoming cards around the world, actually do for when postponements happen. Because, some cards, we've seen some of the top ranked ones, fights being delayed for whatever reason or cancelled. And if there's only 5 fights on these cards, these fight camp ones, you need to have someone in reserve. I mean, maybe that's something that Hearn had in the in his pocket, someone on reserve, and maybe they're just working out the final details. But hopefully in the next few days we get a bit more clarity on this. So Blue Collar Sports TV says, I was disappointed with Sirenko this past weekend, got badly hurt. I wonder how they move him from here. Yeah, good question. Actually, I've just got a translated from his post, where his sort of post-flight thoughts, that's on his Instagram. So he says, friends, thank you all very much for your support and congratulations. The fight was a great experience for me. I'm glad that I was able to pass a certain distance. I express my gratitude to the opponent. We will work on the errors and move on. I also want to say that the organisation of the show was at a good level. Thank you to everyone who made this evening happen. Now, I will recover a little bit, and we together with the team will start preparing for the next match. Got to say, I was less than impressed, given the sort of quality of the fight from Sirenko against Pavel Krylenko. I mean, he really had his stuff rocked in that first round, as you say, badly hurt. I guess to some extent he showed a pretty decent chin, and by the end of that first round he'd largely recovered, and from the second round on started to, pick things up and start to dominate the fight. And then that weird ending, which, I still, because obviously I can't speak Ukrainian, haven't had any clarity about what the actual injury was, except the replay showed Pavel Krylenko sort of got hit on the, was it the wrist area or back of the, sort of forearm or whatever it was. It was weird. Where are we? Lubak says, okay, sorry, I've just skipped a few comments. I'll just get back up. But yeah, getting back to Blue Collar Sports TV's thought there about Sirenko. It will be interesting to see how he has moved. I think to some extent there's a couple of things that probably influence the performance, but some of that is down to him and his management team. He hasn't been as active as he should have been. Obviously, some of that more recently has been enforced by COVID, but he came out of shape for this fight, not his usual shape. Normally, he's somewhere between 239 and 247, and he was 251.9 pounds, and he looked like he, wasn't quite in fighting shape. And, we know that some of these guys would have had limited preparation, limited sparring, but, you can still come in better shape than he did. And I think, as many people have pointed out, this is their living. And this is a guy who normally is in, okay shape, decent shape for his fight. So, as someone messaged me on Twitter, they said it looks like he's been sat down eating pizza over lockdown. And it showed, if you take some of these guys lightly, because some of these, obscure Eastern European journeymen, they've got dreadful looking records. They can be 5-5 or, 5 wins, 8 losses, but they're still a bit of a handful. They might be a bit shorter. They basically have 1 or 2 punches in the arsenal. And with Krylenko, it was effectively a looping overhand right. And the first time he really tried to land it, or one of the first times, he hit the target. And he made Vlad Sirenko do a bit of a dance. And I was thinking, whoa, where would you... Well, I was sort of just caught completely unawares by that. But it made the fight, really interesting. And then you had Alexander Zarkozy on the card, who effectively, was in a alarmingly competitive fight with his opponent, which, was unexpected as well. So... yeah, those two guys, Sirenko and Zarkozy, had a chance to shine in front of a good audience in Ukraine, maybe start, getting some more buzz and attention for themselves. But if you were watching that and you're a casual fan, you may not have been overly impressed with what you saw. So Father Finton Stack. So just apologies, I'm starting to get behind on the chat here. We'll look to catch up. Cheney would box Spong's ears off. Well, Tyrone Spong has, sort of missed opportunities, and is he going to be a guy who, was a decent puncher? Obviously, we know about the combat sports sort of background, but is he going to be a guy that never really quite, sort of converts over, because he's already in his mid-30s? had that opportunity versus Alexander Usyk. There was a failed test, which, haven't really sort of seen what the result of, because at the time he tried to confuse the issue by providing publicly the result of an earlier test. It wasn't the one that he allegedly failed. So I don't know where things sort of sit with that. But if he's going to be fighting, because he's still training, and there's different stuff on his social media, and also the social media account that's associated with the Pedro Diaz gym. So yeah, he's in shape, but not fighting. So Intangible Boxing News says, I think Vickhurst is still alright, but the only man not wounded from the Usyk card. Yeah, well, his opponent, though, that was really a soft sort of lob to him. The guy, I think, in the first 2 minutes threw 1 or 2 punches, and they weren't in anger. He was ready to receive the beating, and ultimately it came in the second round. Vickhurst carried him in that first round. I was thinking he should be able to get him out of here, but obviously he wanted just to ease into it, and he certainly did. But he got him out of there. Nice body shot, followed up with a right hand, and it was pretty, it was all over, she wrote. Right Hook Boxing says, people are going off about a flag shared by AJ on Insta, saying it's a gypsy flag meaning fury, but it's pointing to Pulev, I reckon, Bulgarian gypsy flag. Okay, I haven't caught up with that. Nathan says, Rafael Tronch for Bacoli, more likely to be another UK fighter though, in my opinion. Yeah, the Tronch, I think you suggested that on the video last night in the comment section. I don't mind that. Rafael Tronch is a guy that was sort of come to fight, good power puncher. But yeah, I think it's more likely at this sort of short notice, if Kuzman's off that card, it's going to be a guy that's local that they can sort of draft in. And maybe there is someone that's been on reserve, but we don't know. Bogdan Dinu versus Bacoli. It's probably, yeah, I'm not even sure what Dino is up to at this point. He has obviously had a couple of fights in America in recent years, but he's some sort of special forces police officer or something in Romania. So he is definitely a sort of weekend warrior at this point, as more focused on his own career. Good on him though. Sirenko didn't look good in great shape either. He took his opportunity lightly. Yeah, I agree. I mean, he actually raced out of the his corner after the first bell rung, but after that it sort of didn't really pan out for him in that first round. Declan McCarthy, Villili versus Allen. Don't think the British Board of Control would sort of sanction that, given Villili just got stopped. Nathan says, Dino can box well, but his punch resistance is not great. He gave Pulev a decent fight for 7 rounds. Sort of feels like, there was a couple of fights that I've seen Dino in that it looks like as soon as you start touching him up a bit and hurting him, all of a sudden he just doesn't seem to want it anymore. It's a bit weird. Lubak says Babic versus Allen is possible. Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if that gets made. But then again, if Dave Allen is really taking his career seriously, as he says, why would he be open to a short notice, fight? Sort of seems to go against what he's sort of saying publicly. But ultimately, it's about money. He's turned down other fights recently, like that Huey Fury one. So who knows? Okay, I lost my place in the chat. Just bear with me for a second. Adam says, Wardley should work his way through the Commonwealth route. Some experienced boxers through that path can teach him more than running through Brits. Yeah, I mean, I think he'll probably end up having a few fights at the current level with the English title, probably work towards British, Commonwealth, European, something like that. I mean, I don't see them rushing him. IMPK says, did you see the story about Joshua Vespuli being confirmed for December at Hotspur? I haven't seen that specific story. I mean, I saw something that Steve Kim tweeted, and then I retweeted it saying, can we just get something locked in? Because, I mean, I'm getting a bit fed up with, because to me, a lot of this isn't news. I mean, a week ago, we heard that it was going to be December, in the same details. I mean, it all seems to be, just rehashed every few days to keep the fight out there. Just lock it in already. So Razulbek says, if the topic is about boxing, the world Uzbekistan will be strong because the place is high. Okay. Nathan says, Huey would be a good fight with Bacoli. Agreed, but I doubt it happens. Yeah, I think Huey Fury, he would maybe be reluctant to take it at a couple of weeks' notice. But I do like that fight, and they both have said publicly if they have to fight each other and they're standing in each other's way, and that's that next step to get where they need to go, that they'd fight each other, despite obviously sparring numerous rounds. But I wonder if because they have sparred quite a bit together, will that sort of blunt the sort of fight a little bit? I mean, I think we saw a little bit that, if you recall, Razvan Kajanu and Joseph Parker. Kajanu had been a primary sparring partner for Parker previously to, him being drafted in at short notice after Hughie Fury pulled out of their title fight back in 2017. And I think as a result, Kajanu sort of knew how to protect himself and what Parker was bringing. It kind of ended up being a stinker. It didn't do anything for Joseph Parker or his profile. Declan says Gorman versus Little would be decent, and Nathan responds, Gorman easily beats Little in my opinion, but he needs to return as soon as. Yeah, I think Gorman does beat Little. It'd be interesting to see who he does return against. As I mentioned earlier, it sort of feels like Gorman has had the short end of the stick in terms of the way he's been brought along by Frank Warren, whereas compared to Daniel Dubois, it's been a carefully laid path. They haven't sort of taken any risk, but Gorman often has been sort of short notice for a couple of fights. I hope he does get a rebuild where it actually... because if he does have good skills, and if he looks to, use them, as he didn't in the Dubois fight, but he can find a level in the heavyweight division. I mean, maybe based on what we've seen, maybe he's not going to be a top 20 guy, but certainly there's a place and a living that he can earn in it. So Die Hard Casual says, salute guys. Jay Billow says, what's going on with Hrgovic, and Yoka is back out soon. When will he step up? I think Johan Duopa is a step up. I think that it's a slight step up from the guys he's faced, Dimitrenko and Wallish more recently. I'm not mad at that fight at all. I think it's guy 7-0. He's been out of the ring for a bit because of the pandemic. It's basically a year since he fought. Was it Dimitrenko or Wallish? One of the two. I don't mind that fight at all. It's a natural fight to make in France. It's a domestic sort of, dust up. It's a passing of the torch type fight. I think Duopa has had, shown that he's a durable guy. He's probably going to go some rounds, and Yoka needs that. Oh, Jay Billow says, what's going on with Hrgovic? Well, there was a post on Instagram the other day. He's entered camp, but it's unclear what for. Hopefully there's a fight lined up soon. Chase says, I really want to see Spong at a good gym and brilliant coach, Mundo Boxing Gym. It'd be good to see him. There's a couple of guys that have been floating around seemingly for ages. You really want to know, how good are they? And I think Spong falls into that camp. There's that other guy, James Wilson, sort of who built a profile on social media with the sort of Mike Tyson type, fast editing pad clips, and comparisons with Tyson. But I think as soon as he steps up to any real level, he gets beaten. But there's a number of guys I think you could sort of say, how good are you? And you sort of got your questions. Some of them will sort of come through and surprise us, but most of them, I think generally if you get a good gut feel about someone, generally it pans out. So Adam Fahey says, smash the like button, I should say. Yes, please do so. I can't actually see how many likes there are, but we've got 52 in the building at the moment. Please do hit that like button. It would be much appreciated. Nathan says Hrgovic fighting September 26th, but no opponent confirmed yet. I hadn't heard that, September 26th, so thank you for that. Alexander Hepner says, what do you think about the Sokolowski and Kossobutski fight? I like it. I've already ordered that on Fight TV to watch that tomorrow. It's a good sort of little, run out for Kossobutski. Originally, he was meant to face Jay McFarlane. I did talk about this at the start of the stream, so I won't go too much into it, but I'm looking forward to seeing that fight. Sokolowski will keep him honest. It probably goes a few rounds, and hopefully Kossobutski looks good there. He's sort of at the back end of my top 10 heavyweight prospects right now. He's starting to come through. He's been looking good in recent fights. Yeah, I like the look of Zan Kossobutski. Will says, love the channel, really appreciate your lack of bias and straight facts way of doing things. That said, do you have a favourite active heavyweight? Well, my favourite active heavyweight is Joseph Parker, but that's, the New Zealand connection. But I do try to keep it real about him when I do videos about him, because, I think some of the things with what's happening at the moment, they've missed a trick the last couple of years, and 3 tune-ups in 2 years since that Dillian Whyte loss sort of drifted off the map a little bit, at least in the fighting sense. I think his profile had a good boost during lockdown because of those videos, but that's only going to take you so far. But one of the things that people say that the channel's lack of bias and different bits and pieces, I mean, it still doesn't matter to some people, because you talk about a matchroom fighter, you get Frank Warren fanboys coming in. You talk about a Frank Warren fighter, you get some matchroom fanboys coming in, or others as well. People just get bent out of shape way too easily. If I can't always guarantee you're going to like what I actually say, but I'll tell you what I think. So Noah G says, is Wilder done? I wouldn't have thought so. I mean, he's still going to be facing Tyson Fury. So sly tendencies with the super chat there. Thank you very much for that. He says, Fury versus in shape Ruiz. Who takes it? Hughie Fury or Tyson Fury? I presume you mean Tyson Fury. I think Tyson Fury probably uses his length and jabs Ruiz's head off all day. I think, fighting Deontay Wilder in the way that he did in the rematch, he's probably not going to take that same sort of strategy into a fight with Andy Ruiz, because Ruiz is like a front foot counterpuncher. If you take his opportunities away, he doesn't have a whole lot. And Fury, with a massive reach advantage, basically, was it 9 or 10 inches or whatever, probably just jabs his head off like he's done to so many others, like that Chisora rematch. I mean, I think Tyson Fury would end up sort of, bludgeoning Ruiz's face just all night with that jab. Where did we get to in the chat? Sorry, it just skipped around it. Sometimes, you're scrolling down, all of a sudden, just bam, it just goes down. Nathan says, who would you like to see Zhili Zhang fight next? Anyone that is a step up from Andrei Rudenko's last fight. I think, Zhang, was it 37 or 38 years old? It's time they've got to get him moving. But it'll be interesting. What's the status of his promotional deal? I mean, he was on a co-promotional deal with Matchroom. Hrgovic on a co-promotional deal with Matchroom. As we know, Michael Hunter was with Matchroom. He got cut loose. Some of these other guys, it's a question. Are they still with DAZN, Matchroom, etc.? So Nathan says Zhang versus Kuzman or Bacoli would be decent. Actually, I mean, maybe that Kuzman versus Zhang, that seems like a makeable fight. I think relatively evenly matched too. Who wins in a Ruiz versus Chisora fight? Probably Ruiz, I'd say. Adam says Ruiz beats the brakes off him. AZ says Ruiz. Organic Fitness, exactly enough of AJ Pulev and lock it in already. Yes, please. As you can tell, I'm probably 5 or so minutes behind in the chat here, but we'll just get to a couple of other issues that I had on my list. I'll just go to my notes. So we covered Bacoli, Kuzman not happening. Weird situation. Bacoli's been sparring with Dubois. Dave Allen maybe on the card. Who's he going to be fighting, though? But also, if Alan Babbage is still on the card, who's he going to be fighting? Or is he going to be squeezed off the card? Zan Kosobutsky, Kamil Sokolowski, we covered that. Sirenko's post, we covered that. Otto Wallin, August 15th against Travis Kaufman. He's put up a couple of posts, final week, hard week of sparring and, training, etc. There's not actually a lot of action, heavyweight action this week, or even sort of the next couple of weeks. You've got basically Wallin, Kaufman, August 15th, then Dillian Whyte, Alexander Povetkin on the August the 22nd, which... Let me know your thoughts on this, because it is one of the better heavyweight matchups that's coming up compared to what we've had. And it doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of hype and buzz for it yet. Or is that it just kind of feels like it's still a bit flat, which is a little bit surprising given there's not a whole lot of competition. Not all sports have come back. Not everything's back at full steam. Just kind of feels a little bit flat. Yeah, let me know what you think about that. So Adam Fahey says, people have this very weird perception of Chisora being a top 10 fighter. He's just been very well managed. I think, I certainly concur with that. There's some people believe he's top 10 right now, but remembering it's 2 years since that Takam win. And I know someone's going to come in and say that I'm hating on him or something like that. But that was a faded version of Carlos Takam a couple of years ago, and he was, really putting it on Chisora. Chisora had a great game plan, let Takam gas himself out, he takes him out. But that was 2 years ago. Then he beats a faded Artis Bilke, beats a faded David Price, and a running Senad Gashi who just didn't want to engage. But people are rating him as a top 10 fighter based on that. To me, it doesn't add up. I think his relationship with David Haye has been one of the best repackaging jobs in modern heavyweight history. I truly believe that. I think he's, around just inside the top 20, but I don't think he's a top 10 guy. I know some people are very strong on that, and they get a bit, upset when people say that he's not top 10 or even top 15, but yeah, where's the evidence? I mean, you look at the record. I mean, it's one of these things as well that everyone's quick to sort of explain away all his losses and say he wasn't motivated, but, who else would get away with that in the heavyweight division with 9 losses? Chisora seems to be this guy that's able to sell those losses as it was a good fight, or I wasn't motivated, I wasn't training. This is what people say on his behalf. To me, I mean, that's crazy. And Nathan says Chisora gets a bit overrated in his opinion. Solid fighter though. Yeah, he is a solid fighter. Chisora is always going to be a tough out. But I think he's proven he's got a level in the heavyweight division, and he's just can't get to that sort of world level sort of, he can't get those sort of top wins. What do you think about Zhili Zhang versus Jianlong Zhang for the Chinese Heavyweight Championship? Well, I think it's a natural fight. They probably should have made it. Both these guys are in America right now, training in America. There's no reason they couldn't fight. It sort of seems to, and they've both been, pretty inactive in recent years. But I've got to say, Jianlong Zhang's Instagram, if you haven't seen it, it's hilarious. He's clearly doing a lot of clips for TikTok and stuff like that. But yeah, seems like a really quirky character. El Padrino says Chisora top 10 shows how dog shite this era actually is, but I don't think he is top 10. So I mean, some people are going to get up in their feelings about that, but we're all entitled to our opinions here. AZ says Chisora keeps winning, so he deserves respect, but let's remember his limitations. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good way to sum it up. He does have good skills, and the Troll Network says he's a gatekeeper. And you'd probably say he's a really good gatekeeper. Whereas, a comparison with a guy like Kamil Sokolowski is a gatekeeper at a lower level. He's a guy for up-and-coming prospects, sort of between 5 and 10 fights. If you're not good enough, you're not going to beat Sokolowski. Chisora is that if you beat him, you're ready for world level. Adam Fahey says Chisora is fringe top 20. Nathan says he thinks Hunter would beat Chisora. Yeah, I would pick Hunter in that one. Declan says he's just an absolute dog still. Managed to get very decent wins. Hasn't had a title shot in a while, though. Excited for the Usyk fight. Yeah, I mean, the Usyk fight's going to tell us, I think, more about Usyk than Chisora. I mean, Chisora is a known quantity, what he's going to do. But Usyk, with the inactivity, coming off injuries, is his prime sort of passing him by? Remembering he relies on that movement and athleticism, to implement his style. So, yeah, it's going to tell us more about Usyk than Chisora. But if Chisora manages to beat Usyk and get the WBO mandatory, well, he's sitting pretty. So, Schwan says Gorman is barely above Dave Allen on a good level. That's ruthless. I mean, I think Gorman would handily outbox Dave Allen. He's got a relatively decent chin. He took a few good ones before from Daniel Dubois before going down. Nathan says Chisora's best win is Takam. Maybe he got jobbed versus Helenius and Caballero beat him handily. And that result with Caballero was certainly closer on the cards. And there is a brigade of fans that sort of say Caballero's lived off that win. But then again, Chisora's lived off the Takam win. So if people are being equal, they'll look at it and go, well, what's he really done since? Because it hasn't been, killer after killer in terms of opposition. He's been well matched and he's looked good in doing so. But that's, how they built him up to get that rematch against Dillian White. Had that result against Carlos Takam and all of a sudden it became viable. Good on him for earning what he's earned in his career, and given the losses, he's done great for himself. And you also got to commend Dave Allen for especially building a career largely off a social media presence. Okay, I'll just have a drink, and I might just move past some of the Chisora talk and Gashi talk. So Chase Athletics says, any news on Brian and Lovejoy King promotional card? I mean, we've seen Christopher Lovejoy ranked, which he said was going to happen. So I'm expecting at some point that the fight's going to be announced, because there's only a reason that would get fulfilled is if he is being lined up. But you got to sort of, I think, for Don King and Trevor Bryan to basically select Lovejoy from somewhat obscurity in the opponents that he's faced, it's going to be interesting to see how they, try to pitch this one. So Organic Fitness says Christopher Lovejoy equals boxing squared. I know some people say you shouldn't cover Christopher Lovejoy, but I find him hilarious. And most times it's just a little bit of something he's said or done at the end of a mashup video. But yeah, he is an interesting character, and guys like him do keep the heavyweight division interesting. And I think everyone just wants to know, can the guy fight? How good is he? Teddy B says Joseph Parker needs a fight. He certainly does. AZ says Fury is too much for Ruiz. I agree on that. I'll just look back at my notes for a sec. I think we covered everything off that I was looking to cover. So I'll quickly work through these comments, and maybe we'll be on for another 10 minutes or so. It's amazing how sometimes these live streams, the time flies. It really does go quickly. Because I sort of think, oh yeah, I'll jump on, maybe half an hour or so, and then all of a sudden it's an hour and a half. So Solid Mid-Packer says that will be the same result as Lennox Tour. Oh, Fury and Ruiz. Yeah, I think it would be safety first from Tyson Fury to a large extent. He knows that Ruiz can punch and is dangerous. Tyson Fury is not above being hit. And I think Andy Ruiz Jr., if you compare him to Deontay Wilder, just in terms of the skill set, he does have, better technical skills. He's got slow feet, Andy Ruiz, but he's got okay footwork and obviously blaring hand speed, and he looks for those counter opportunities. So Fury was a little bit, risky in terms of, staying too close up in the pocket or at a range where Ruiz can get some of his counter opportunities away. It could be dangerous for Fury, but I think he would sort of just, it would be a sort of boxing exhibition. We've seen those sorts of performances from Fury before. He knows what he needs to do to get the win, and that's largely what I think he would do against that Ruiz, because Ruiz is obviously a dangerous fighter too. So we've got, please break down the Wilder White situation. So Slide Tendencies with a $2 super chat there, appreciate that. That's an interesting fight because, Dillian White's always sort of said that he's going to go, at Deontay Wilder, and he didn't believe that he had a back foot game, and he thought he could bash him up. But as we see, a guy like Tyson Fury took risks in that fight, calculated risks, but he's got better footwork and balance and head movement compared to Dillian White. So, I know people have written Deontay Wilder completely off, but other guys that would want to execute a similar game plan aren't 6'9". So it would be a risky situation just trying to, walk right in and try to knock him out. I think maybe some guys would have success in that way, but you've still got to respect the power. And that's, why a number of guys, have obviously been a bit fearful of what Wilder's going to bring and fought in a certain way. You've seen guys like Gerald Washington, Artur Spilka really sort of, work the jab and rely on their skills to Ortiz as well, but he had a really high-risk game plan in that first fight, which was he was looking to punch with Wilder, and it sort of backfired. So some of those guys that are a bit shorter don't have the reach advantage over Wilder. They're putting themselves in danger, but I hope that fight happens because it would be, a good fight for the heavyweight division. And there's going to be a lot of people who back Wilder and a lot of people who back Dillian White. I think some of these fights, even though probably could have and should have happened a year or two ago, I still want to see them. But if Tyson Fury beats Deontay Wilder a third time in the third fight, or should I say, if he beats him in the third fight for the second time, obviously there was the draw on the first one, I would still hope we'd see Deontay Wilder and given the record, obviously 1 or 2 losses, etc., and the draw, there's no reason that they would have to, have him against some of the opposition that he faced earlier in his championship reign. You're thinking the likes of Molina, Areola, Spilka, Washington. That sort of level of opposition. There's no room for that anymore. And I'm sure his handlers, after bringing him along for 12 years, it's sort of cash in time. I don't want to say cash out, but they can make money off Deontay Wilder, as they have been, and that money will drop down to a really low level if it goes back to your Spilkas, Washingtons, etc. So hopefully they would make some of those good. I could see Wilder versus Ruiz happening rather than Wilder versus White, but I'd like to see those fights. So Organic Fitness with the super chat. He says, "You converted me to a Lovejoy fan, mate." Well, the guy for me is hilarious, and sort of his Instagram, because clearly he's a salesman, and there's certain things that he's fronting and putting across, and yeah, to me it's hilarious. I've totally lost my place in the chat now after getting to those couple of messages. I'll just scroll up a little bit. We'll see. Got a whole bunch of messages that were deleted by someone's called Khabib's Hat, so no idea what that's about. So Adam says, interested to see who Johan Pablo Hernandez is making a comeback against at heavy. Was that the guy who just re-signed with SES? I saw something about that. Someone shared something with me about that. Teddy B says Chisora is going to get knocked out in his next fight. Don't worry, Boxing Squared. Lawrence says, what do you think about Michael Polite Coffee versus Luis Pena Saturday on FS1? I don't even think I've seen that listed on BoxRec, actually. It's, yeah. I mean, Michael Polite Coffee, I think in some respects, he's a little like Fabio Wardley in the sense that, came to boxing a bit later, obviously got power and natural ability. And the fights that I've seen him in, there's a couple, ones where he's got spectacular knockouts. I've liked what I've seen. Hopefully he can get a bit of a promotional push, because there's a few guys seemingly that have either come to the sport late or been mismanaged just in general, that you kind of think, they could make more of where they are at the moment, but don't. So Declan says, Parker, the only good New Zealand guy, ? Wasn't David Tua from New Zealand? Yes, he was from New Zealand. And Parker, in terms of New Zealand boxing, he's pretty much the face of New Zealand boxing, and it's a very niche sport here in New Zealand. But you have other heavyweights like Hemia Hill, Junior Fa. There are a few others like Toa Luteli. There was another heavyweight, Patrick Mailata, who recently lost to Kingsley Iber on the one of the top ranked cards. But they're the sort of 5 New Zealand heavyweights of any real note. After that, there's a bit of a drop off. But yeah, I think Parker, he's the only one sort of operating at sort of within the sort of top 20 level, facing good opposition. Guys like Ahio and Far have potential, but they haven't really sort of fought anyone. So Right Hook Boxing says you're not blocked. Okay, I'm not sure who that's in reference to, but bear in mind, if you've just tuned in, I'm actually about 5 or 10 minutes behind on the chat. So if I don't respond to you straight away, don't get up in your feelings, because I'm working my way through the chat right now. Nathan says Chisora got jobbed to Hellenius and was unlucky in the first White fight. In my opinion, his losses were against good opposition, I must say. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things, despite all the losses, for the most part, he's fought good opposition. And I agree, Hellenius in the first White fight, a bit unlucky. So now we've got a whole bunch of deleted messages from Phil Bant. Okay, I'm not sure what this was about, so I'll just keep scrolling. So Adam says, bye-bye, Phil. Okay, if someone wants to tell me what some of these, all these deleted messages were about, it'd be much appreciated. Just drop it at the bottom of the chat there. I'll try to look on the left-hand side. I take it people must have got up in their feelings about something, maybe because the Chisora comments. I mean, I'm not telling you to agree with me. If you don't agree with my opinion, that's fine. But the thing is, and this is one of the hallmarks of comments on boxing forums, comment sections, and this, people just get so up in their feelings and bent out of shape that they get abusive. And if you decide to do that on this channel, you probably won't be able to comment for much longer. We can have a debate about these things, but if you don't like my opinion, that's fine. Make your case then. So the Troll Network says, I'd love to see Ortiz, Pavek and Pulev all face each other. Yeah, I mean, it's probably a bit late in their careers now. I think if Pulev gets beaten by Joshua, probably retires. White beats Povetkin, probably retires. Ortiz, well, I think he will just continue. I mean, it's hard to know if he'll be in any more big fights, but if he is, I could still see him continuing. There sort of seems to be no, stop button, and he's probably going to be earning decent money as he sort of last few fights, so why not? So Nathan says Solis and Stavern both train in KFC, it looks like. Well, actually, you've had Stavern, who, unlike before he was his title fight, he's been training over lockdown, and actually he's down to about 240 pounds, but kind of feels like it was, the horse has bolted on that one. Unga says, howdy, arriving late. My car was just stolen. Oh, really? Well, hopefully you get that back, Unga. That's troubling news. Thomas says, thoughts on Fabio Wardley's next opponent. We did talk about that earlier. Nick Webb seems to be a popular sort of opinion, or fights in or around that level for maybe the next couple. Unga says, it looks like my wrench has been stolen too. Okay, I'm not sure. I mean, you're definitely a moderator. I'll go back in and check. I'm not sure what that's about. So Declan says, ironically, I don't think Ruiz has the same hunger he once did. Well, we're going to find out at some point. I mean, he wants this tune-up fight, likely to be Areola, soon to be announced once the Fox sort of schedule is sort of falling into place. I still want to see that Ruiz versus Ortiz fight that we're talking about. Ortiz still wants it, and he knows that it's probably not happening until next year. So if they had that fight, it's, I think they can, that's a really good main event. So Nathan says, Adi on his channel said Fabio Wardley is only 6'2", he's listed at 6'5", he looks under that, but no way he's 6'2", I'd guess near to 6'4". Yeah, maybe 6'3", 6'4", yeah, 6'5" seems like a bit of a stretch. I mean, against Vespuli, who was, 3 or 4 inches shorter, there didn't look to be too much of a differential there. I mean, but these guys always pump on an extra inch or two. I mean, Povetkin sometimes listed at 2, 6'3", he's, 6 or 6'1". Dillian White might be 6'2". David Hay, they're all sort of exaggerating to some extent. I mean, Joseph Parker, I don't think he's 6'4", I think he's more 6'3". There's a lot of guys that, just maybe minus an inch, and that's probably more accurate than their listing. A Sly Tendency says he was wondering about the White Wilder situation because I've heard that Deontay is dodging Dylan. I guess, depending on where you're coming from that situation, he didn't need to give White the fight because he had his own thing going. They had a plan for Deontay Wilder about what they were looking to do, and it was very calculated. And it wasn't, their plan wasn't to try give matchroom guys just opportunities, unless it was the undisputed fight. But obviously, as we know, none of that really sort of panned out. Sam says, what's the news with Parker and Junior Farr? Really hasn't been much. Sam says, obviously, but the fight on, have also heard Lucas Brown. Well, Lucas Brown apparently is going to still be fighting Abdi Dovtaev, so we'll see. Sam says, speaking of New Zealand boxing, I've heard Mark Hunt will be boxing again soon. I think there was an article the other week. Wasn't he going to be facing Paul Gallen or someone in Australia in a couple of months? I saw something about that. Organic Fitness says New Zealand has potential if it focused on boxing. I think it's one of those things, you need, I mean, it might be the case that Joseph Parker might have inspired some fighters that we'll see in 10 or 15 years type thing. Kind of like David Tua did. He was doing his thing back in the 90s. But yeah, I don't know if it's ever going to... It's certainly a lot smaller than it used to be. And this is why I sort of think if DAZN came to New Zealand, you couldn't, and it is, you couldn't just have boxing, because I don't think there's the audience for it to really generate a subscriber base. You might get people dipping in for a Parker fight, for example, but much else, maybe not. I think there's a small pool of hardcore boxing fans compared to, the other sporting, landscape, or the sporting landscape within New Zealand. Unga says, yeah, Mark Hunt versus Paul Gallant. Yeah, I saw something on that. My thoughts on Parker versus Farr, says the Troll Network. Yeah, I think at this point, Joseph Parker wins. I mean, that fight to be seen as competitive and fans wanting to see it, Farr's got to do more sort of to build his name and reputation. That's going to take him fighting some names that people respect. Solid mid-packer, Daniel Dubois versus Hrgovic, who wins? I guess it depends when it happens. Because Hrgovic, he's actually sparred Daniel Dubois a number of times and apparently given a good account of himself. I think Dubois, in a number of years, depending on his arc going up, remembering, what is he, 23 at the moment, I think the later it goes, it probably favours, say if it was in 3 or 4 years, probably favours Dubois. But right now, Hrgovic probably, it's hard to say. I mean, that's a really interesting fight, but we won't get it. That's the thing. It's not going to happen right now. Sam says, will Sonny Bill fight again? Possibly. Yeah, I'm not necessarily so interested. I mean, he's not going to really try to look to do anything really in the sport. It's it's going to be a Paul Gallen pay-per-view or something like that. Just have a drink, just a sec. 55 in the building. Thank you one and all for joining the live stream, wherever you are, morning, noon or night. Will says, what about shape Ruiz versus Wilder? I think Ruiz probably takes it actually, but my family all think Wilder would do it pretty easily. I think that's a tougher fight. I mean, Wilder has those advantages which he can use. He's got quickness. He can, make it awkward with his length. 6'7" against a guy who's 6'1", but if Ruiz gets inside and starts battering to the body and head, anything can happen. It's an interesting fight for all sorts of reasons. If Berman Stavern fights again, who should he fight in your opinion? I saw he dropped some weight. Yeah, I don't really want to see him fight again. Honestly, I think, he's probably done. He might be like Ustinov and keep hanging around. Tommy says, is Big Baby coming back ever again? I think it's August the 4th here in New Zealand today. He's got a hearing on August the 5th, so I guess watch the space, but it might only be some sort of preliminary hearing to sort of set a more substantive hearing down the line. He's going to get some sort of ban of some sort, you'd imagine. You'd hope. Nathan says, I met Daniel Dubois in person. I asked him, he said he's 6'4.5", but he is billed at 6'5", so not much more of a stretch. Hay looks 6'2" at best. Some fights they've had Dubois at 6'4", and then other times he's been listed at 6'5". It's been a little bit all over the place. Angus says, guys like Milas, Shaw, Franklin, Coffey, Rock, Minor are all good for Stavern. Yeah, Stavern as the opponent. Apologies, some background noise. There's some construction, over the road there's some sort of new roof going up, but I think they might be painting like lines on the street or something today. There's like cones up and all down. I don't know what's going on, but if you can hear something, that is the noise. Something outside that's noisy, slowly rolling past. Tommy says Stavern is done. Yep, stick a fork in him. He is done. Nathan says Stavern versus a Jagba. Actually, that might be the right sort of fight. Sort of like Joyce had against Stavern. He's durable to some extent if you're not a massive one-punch power like sort of Deontay Wilder. But I think a Jagba with those straight right hands eventually wears him down, a la sort of Joe Joyce and his clubbing punches. Jay Billow says, I see White Povetkin as a sure win for White. Povetkin too old, he'll break down. Yeah, I mean, White's the favourite for a reason. It is a past prime Povetkin, but he can still give him a test. But, you know, it's not a 50-50 in my view at this point. I feel like Ruiz keeps crying wolf with opponents. Well, some of it is, you know, he might be saying whatever he's saying in public, remembering he's negotiating a Chris Arreola fight, but then he was talking about Dillian Whyte and wanting to fight him now or next, but at the same time he's spoken about wanting to fight Luis Ortiz, but after a tune-up. I did a video sort of saying he can't keep his story straight because he says all these different things on social media, sort of all over the place. I don't know if it's crying wolf with opponents. I think some of it is he's obviously got a social media person and they're not sort of syncing up with what he should be saying, just so there's some consistency. I mean, fighters calling out other fighters is nothing new, but if you're going to be into another fight and you've got no intention of, you know, fighting the guy, why call him out? So solid mid-packer says Abdi Davtaev sat on a wall. Abdi Davtaev had a great fall. I think he still beats Lucas Brown though. Lucas Brown is shot. He's like Stavern, done. Sam says, I would say Fury is 6'7", not 6'9". Well, yeah, I mean, when you've seen David Price, who's, I think, a legit 6'8", Fury is shorter, so I think 6'9" is maybe stretching it. And if you've noticed, and I've mentioned this before, Fury often wears hats where you can see there's about a gap of an inch from his head to the actual top of the head. And I think that's deliberate too. So Liam says, there is talk that DAZN want to pick up the A-League football, soccer in Australia. They would do well to pick up Super Rugby also for New Zealand. Well, they can't. All the rights are locked up. They're not getting cricket or rugby. That's all sort of locked up for the next, I think, 4 or 5 years. Slight Tendency says, hit the like button. Yes, please. That would be much appreciated. Kian Burns says, Joseph Parker versus Michael Hunter. Who wins? That's an interesting fight because they fight in a similar sort of way. Maybe Hunter is a little bit more dynamic in terms of the sort of in and out type movement, but they both move well. They like to pick their shots. You know, I think that would be a very close fight. I think I would, because Joseph Parker and Michael Hunter, they've got power, but it's not elite level power in my view. And I don't see either sort of, I don't see Hunter dropping Parker. I mean, it depends if Hunter starts to unravel later in the fight. But as we know, Joseph Parker, he's a guy that sort of goes into like some sort of energy conserving mode in the mid rounds. He did that against White. He's done that in countless fights where he just sort of rounds slip away. So if it was competitive early on, they're sharing rounds, but then Parker gives up a few in the middle. But Hunter can tire a bit too. So, I think that would go to the cards and be a close decision. Nathan says Stavern needs to retire for his own health. I don't agree. I don't disagree with that at all. Right hook boxing is favouring Parker in a Hunter fight. Unger says DAZN have dropped all matchroom fights in markets outside the USA and only PBC fights streaming. It'd be good to, because I hear that in some markets that PBC fights are picked up by DAZN. If they had all their American fights, their schedule, if they had Sky fights, if they had a whole bunch of everything in the PBC fights, that would be, a great, because I've seen, and I can't talk about the price, I mentioned this in the other stream because I'm one of the testers, as, a lot of people in the stream, no doubt, in their market have signed up to, effectively, you get to, watch free fights when they come up because they're testing, they want to see how it is. But if they were able to get a really good schedule, I'd probably pick it up. But if it's only, the current schedule, which is pretty sporadic, I think I'd wait. Do I think that AJ will knock out Pulev? Is it? You've got Pov there, so he knocked out Povetkin, but yeah, he probably stops Kubrat Pulev. Nathan says, how good was Stavern at his peak in your opinion? He did beat Arreola twice, but Arreola is nothing special himself, but a tough guy. I think, I think there's certain points, especially between 2010 and 2015, we can certainly say that, and maybe to an extent in the 2000s, the division as itself was a bit soft in terms of the quality of fighters. There could be a lot of competitive fights, but not necessarily. I mean, you had some of these guys working their way to shots against Vlad, a guy like Alex Leopai. And even at that point, I never thought Leopai was much chop. Stavern, I think at one point was rated the number 4 heavyweight in the world. But, I mean, I never thought he was like going to trouble anyone at a real level, and as soon as he had a fight against Deontay Wilder, he lost. And it was what it was. I mean, there's a number of guys who sort of lucked into a situation like he did, and he's now a former world champion. Declan says, it'd be interesting to see how he gets on with Povetkin now he's with a new trainer. Yeah, I think the game plan might sort of shift, and I've still got to do my preview video for that one. And I've got to get onto it in the next couple of days because I've been procrastinating. Because it sort of takes the best part of a full day to sort of, for those more structured videos where I've got to write a script. Most of my stuff is, just off the top, but those 10 things to watch for videos do a bit more prep. So I should actually try to do at least a half an hour just putting some notes together to get a head start. I already started about 3 weeks ago and just kind of hasn't gone anywhere. But there's not a lot of big fights coming up in the next week or two, so I'm going to have time. Well, there'll be more opportunity. Maybe I won't have time, but I'll make time. Yusuf says, I'm a big fan of your channel. Thumbs up. Thank you very much for supporting the channel. Ty Foster says, hello to you too. Unga says, my bad, I meant GB, not PBC. Jamie Kyle, I was about to say Jeremy Kyle, I might put a fly tenner on Povetkin. Yeah, I mean, I guess the odds for a Povetkin knockout probably at this stage of his career, but if you actually look at the last 4 or 5 years, really hasn't knocked too many guys out. He did stop Durpa on a day's notice, and what was that, in 2016, I want to say, mid-2016. He's dangerous early, but I would expect if White sees him off early, it's White's fight to lose. So Tommy says, I loved your channel. I'm hitting the like button right now. Yes, please. That would be much appreciated. That could be something to do with Sky. I think Eddie's contract is either up this year or next, so it'll be interesting to see if he sticks with Sky or goes all in with DAZN. Well, I think you need to also flip that situation, because Sky may not actually be too happy with some of what's happened since Matchroom linked up with DAZN, and obviously they started Matchroom USA. They started to have siphon more fighters out there for American cards, and I think arguably the quality of some of those Sky fight nights, the ones that are just regular TV, not pay-per-views, it's probably dropped. I mean, hasn't been too many really big fights on those sorts of cards in recent years. And you might find, because they've got an exclusive deal at the moment with Sky, and I think they get about $3 million per show or something like that, you might find that Sky decide, actually, we want to open this up to some more competition, which previously was the case. And that could work well for them. They may not be completely happy with the offering that they've had from Matchroom. So I think you have to consider that it's not just a Matchroom pulling away type thing if that happens, that it might be a mutual thing, or it might be that they have a new deal where there's others that can come in. I mean, certainly I would, if I was Sky in these times and there was a little uncertainty about the quality of cards and, Matchroom maybe being spread thin to cover a few markets, maybe you want others coming in. And I think the competition will help, push a bit more quality too. Unga says, apart from Price, Povetkin ain't KO'd anyone in 4 years. KO White unlikely. Yeah, Price, I forgot that one. Yeah, I think before that was Durpa, the last one. But yeah, in the last 5 or 6 years, there hasn't been a lot of knockouts from him. Let me suck your toes, girl. Fantastic nickname. I predict Wardley will become the undisputed heavyweight champion within 5 years, and Ipswich will become the mecca of heavyweight boxing. That's an interesting prediction there. So we're at 1 hour 17 into the stream, 1 hour 18, clicking over now. Any final comments will wrap up in the next few minutes. I always say this and it ends up sort of pushing out, but any final comments or questions we'll get to, and then we'll be out the door. So drop them now or forever hold your peace, or just have a sip of coffee in the meantime. And apologies if you're listening, if you left a comment earlier and I've skipped over it. Sometimes the chat just flybys quickly. I lose my place. It's hard to get back. But as I say, not a lot on the horizon in terms of the division in the next week or two. The Zan Kosovitsky versus Kamil Sokolowski fight is on tomorrow, so it's less than 24 hours from the time the stream is, maybe about 16. It's on an LCS card which is happening in Minsk. It's called Cold War's Battle for. It's on Fight TV. And yeah, so I'm going to be watching that, and I posted a little montage on my Twitter of the weigh-in. So Sokolowski was 227, Sokolowski was 227 and Vespuli was 231. So Unger asking, any news on why Vespuli Kuzmin is off? No. So yeah, that's a really weird situation. So I was sort of talking about that at the top of the live stream. It's hard to know what's happening. Obviously, the mention of Dave Allen coming in. Well, is he coming in to fight Vespuli, replace Vespuli, or maybe fight Alan Babbage? Or is Alan Babbage going to get squeezed off the card? Hard to say. But yeah, as I was sort of saying, if you've just joined the stream and you're maybe going to go back and watch the earlier part of it, do let me know if YouTube has put a whole bunch of ads in there, because I went to listen back to the stream from the other day and horrified to see YouTube had put about 15 ads in the first hour. It was every 2 or 4 minutes. It was crazy, and so I went in and deleted all, except, you know, I put it one every sort of 15 or 20 minutes. But yeah, every 2 to 3 minutes. You know, I certainly don't like watching live streams that have that frequency, because it just breaks up the flow. So if you are going to go back and watch, or you're listening to this on archive, let me know if there was a whole bunch of ads, and I'll go in and try to correct it. Getting back to the, you can probably hear some sort of truck or something happening in the background here. Who would you match Dave Allen with if he goes on the card that he could win against? Well, if he's serious about saying he's truly giving it and doing it the right way, why would he go on this card at 2 weeks' notice? It's just, you know, it doesn't make sense. Do you think Adam Smith offered Abani Bridges $500 for her socks? He may have offered her more for something else. Yeah. Do you think AJ and Fury will ever happen? It's a good question. It's not going to happen, I don't think, for at least a year. Declan says, did you study sports journalism and decide to start a channel? No, I was a journalist for a decade, a news journalist. Sports journalism is the Wild West. Opinion passed off as fact, you know, most of the time. Even, yeah, most sports it's a weird type of journalism, sports journalism. You might only need one comment, one voice to get across a story, whereas a traditional story in the news media, you need at least 3 sources to try to provide, you know, balance and, you know, coverage that, you know, people can get a full picture of what's going on. Boxing is, I think, even weirder with the whole, some boxing sites and channels that have access, they obviously toe a certain line because they don't want the access cut off. But no, I didn't study sports journalism per se, but I did study journalism and was a journalist for 10 years. But, you know, I've been out of that game for, you know, almost as long as I was in it. Yusuf says, I can't wait for the trilogy fight between Wilder and Fury. Another fight we're still waiting to hear on. Sam said, I'd imagine it's COVID related. I'm not sure he has the country yet, so it might be under quarantine restrictions on entry. Forced Ghost Fabio says, hail boxing squared. There's no need for that. Kian says, also, you're one of my favourite boxing channels to watch. I watch your vids every morning when I wake up, and you get around to everything, so thanks for the good content. Well, thank you for watching. I mean, if people are, you know, liking the content, coming back to watch it, and it's resonating, then, you know, it makes it worthwhile for me, because this is a good creative outlet for me. That was part of the reasons that I started the channel just over 3 years ago. Love the sport, love covering the heavyweight division. And as I get further into the channel, hopefully the content overall and the editing in particular, that's one thing I'm trying to just slowly improve over time. Hopefully it is resonating. I know that, and this will be one of the things with the Yazan Vespuli and Kamil Sokolowski fight. Someone on the channel for that post-fight review, and they're going to say, why are you bothering to cover this fight? And I think anyone who covers or, you know, watches the heavyweight division closely, you know why I'm covering it, because it's a decent fight. It's an up-and-coming prospect. I mean, other channels cover prospects coming up in other divisions. Why do you just have to cover the 5 names, you know, 5 big names in the heavyweight division? I mean, to me, that is boring. I like the sort of storylines of some of these guys coming through. Not all of them are going to pan out. You know, probably if there's 10 or 20 good prospects, maybe 3 or 4 will pan out, and there'll be a whole bunch of others that'll come out of left field. So Liam Roskell says, not interested in Fury Wilder 3 at all. and Webb would be a good fight again, says Kian, for Allen. Yeah, that rematch, I mean, yeah, that's another good one. Tommy says, do you think Fury will knock out another top 10 heavyweight like White or Ruiz? I could see him stopping White. I think it would be a case similar to the Chisora rematch, using, you know, his advantages to his advantage. But as you can probably hear, this whatever's happening outside is starting to get closer and louder, so we'll wrap it up here. Hour 24 into the stream. Yeah, thank you for watching. 41 in the building. I appreciate your time and effort coming to the channel, supporting the channel. It is much appreciated. I probably don't say it enough, but you know, everyone supporting the channel makes it worthwhile and to keep it going. So yeah, thank you for coming, supporting the channel once again. I appreciate it. So